Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the talkback for our production of The Taming of the Shrew by William Shakespeare and directed by Shana Cooper, currently running in the Touchstone Theater now through November 14th and on our APT at Home platform. Look for that starting next week early. I'm joined today by all 5 members of the cast, Alejandra Escalante and Daniel Molina, Colleen Madden and Jim Ridge, and finally, Casey Huckstra. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of time with us today. So we're going to get started in just a second, but for those of you in the audience joining us for the first time for one of our online talkbacks, if you have any questions for our actors or questions about the rehearsal process in general, please type those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen and we'll address those as we go. But for now, just to get us started, I have a few questions of my own for the cast. So since Daniel and Alejandra are members of the company at APT for the very first time, I want to start by asking what the experience has been like for the two of you. How is working here at APT different at all from your experience working elsewhere, whether that be the company itself or living in Spring Green for the month and change that you've been here? And has anything surprised you about acting on stage at American Players Theater?
Ooh. Well, yeah, that was a lot. Hi, hello. First of all, it's been a very, very warm welcome. It's really kind of, we felt very little has been like brought to my attention that it's our first year here. Aside from just the fact
not knowing where certain things are.
Yeah,
but that's
so that learning curve, trying to find all the foodstuffs. But no, it's been fantastic. I've always been wanting to come out here ever since I heard about it, and so many actors had talked about it being an actor's playground where you like really get to just focus on the work, because there are so few other distractions to speak of. So after 2020, I mean, I'm gonna speak for you as well.
Don't do it.
Okay, no, I'm gonna. We were very excited to work in that way because it had been so long since we had worked in general, but really had done anything
Zip the lip, buddy.
in that way. So it's been awesome, and I've had a great time here so far.
No.
This is the moment.
Like, right now is the time. No, it's been awesome. I grew up in Chicago, so and have been lucky enough to do theater in Chicago, and I've had so many friends that have kind of up in Chicago and worked here and have heard so many good things. So honestly, not after COVID, I mean, we're still in it, but I kind of thought maybe I would never act again. Like, I was pretty confident that was a serious possibility. So all of this is just taken in like just huge amounts of gratitude, and I'm trying to enjoy every minute of it, and just like squeeze every little bit of joy out of it. So just happy. Yeah.
Great. That's great to hear. That's been great so far. I'm curious if you all had worked with your director, Shana Cooper, before now.
I had, yes. We had done an off-Broadway show. It was very, very, very different from The Taming of the Shrew. But it felt very similar because she has such a specific way of working, in that specifics are very important. She's so detail oriented, and you're never done. Even now, it feels like I'm still working out little moments within it. So,
well, we've known her for a long time, and have been friends with her and her husband, and have been super admirers of her work. Production of Julius Caesar that she did at OSF, that was just like, so yeah.
Great. Good to know that there was a prior relationship there. So I want to make sure that we are touching on some of the rehearsal process and even some of the pre-rehearsal process, because there was a workshop period before you all actually got into the same room together. But keeping in mind that this is an audience talkback for their questions, we've already got a couple in the Q&A. So here we go. Mary Rendell. As several actors have them, would you be willing to share the meanings behind your tattoos? So I think this is for just about everybody in the cast. Am I right in saying that? No, nothing for Casey. Jim, how about we start with you then?
Yeah, I have tattoos on both shoulders. One is a frog that I got right when Gidry was like a year old. Colleen loves frogs, so it was an attempt to get my wife to love me again. No, it wasn't. And underneath is the Greek word for grace, because I feel like a toad in need of grace. And on the other shoulder is a crane. And
It's a symbol of grace, right?
it's it's a symbol of grace. And it strikes me as, it feels like me, sort of awkward looking, but in probably flies.
So if anyone who hasn't seen the show can't already guess, there's a little bit of skin shown at several points in the play.
Not so much as it would upset anyone. Like if you eat right before,
Shoulders.
it's probably
Just
still
shoulders.
okay.
We're into student matinees now, though.
Lots of
So
shoulders in the
everything has
show.
had to stay PG. So thank you very much, Mary. Joe has a question. Were there any qualms about revising Kate's big speech at the end? So I suppose this is a question for you, Alejandra, but I think this sort of segues into some of the script work that you all had done in the workshop period, as I imagine you kept going with in the rehearsal process. So Alejandra, any thoughts about how it was to play that speech versus maybe a more traditional way of approaching it?
Yeah, so we had 2 workshops over Zoom where we were really looking at the text and if we were going to change anything, if we're going to cut anything, a lot of that type of work. And I had lots of conversations with Shana about like, I'm getting there, I'm getting there. And then that last speech comes and I'm like, what? But what's funny is actually in the build of it and in the build of what the story was, that last speech just became clearer and clearer to me every day, as even if we hadn't changed all the words, and a few words, I'm sorry, very, very few words, even if we hadn't changed them, and I'm really grateful that we did, I now understand Kate's freedom enough at that point in their journey, because I don't think this is where their journey ends, but at that point in her journey, that I find that speech incredibly freeing. And Shana really gave me the freedom to just make it true for myself every night, and hopefully take the audience with me. So I was very glad that we changed just a few things, like instead of women saying people, and just making it a more universal experience of what it is to love and be loved. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm sort of curious now that we're talking about the ways that you have approached some of the text, some of the not altering so much as cutting, but Casey, I have to believe, given the lift that you're doing in this play by playing all of those different characters, that this was a question that came up in the workshop and the rehearsal process. Were there any moments that were memorable for you that you maybe had to look at the master text and say, yeah, this is not going to work with me having to do all 3 of these different things in the scene? Or were you playing this for the most part word perfect from what Shakespeare had given you?
Honestly, with me, I think it went the other direction. I think there were quite a few times when I vied for Shana to cut more of my text because I was doing a lot of speaking. And so there were many times when, and also Jim and I discovered in playing that sometimes, on the page, it would make sense to have text, but actually in the way that we had to build it and become the different characters and fit all the pieces together, that actually snipping a few lines here or there to relieve characters of having to appear actually made the story make more sense with how we're building it. So that was a very fun part of the process, is just the Tetris. I think there's a very small line for Lucentio that I added back in when he's talking to me as Hortensio, just because it's very, very snarky, and I really liked it. But otherwise, I think it was mostly about, and Shauna did this as well at times. She just said, instead of saying her or they, actually put the names of the characters back into your lines, because the audience cannot see them because you're being all of them. You, Jim, Colleen are being all the other people. So just naming them helps fill out the imagination in the story. So most of that was just sort of helping the construction, the architecture of the story.
Great. Now, so since you've already mentioned some of the work that you've done to make things maybe a little bit more specific than would be in the parent text, I wanted to ask about the switching of the characters, but particularly the vocabulary that you all are using. There's some hat work being done throughout. There's some changing of suit jackets or what have you. I'm curious if that was an idea that came directly from Shana and then you all had to try and put that into practice, or was that something that you all as a company found in the rehearsal room, the vocabulary of here's what we do to signify that now we're a different character and then how we go back? Maybe Colleen, if you were involved in those conversations at any point.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably a time for everybody to unmute and pitch in, but one of the things that I did not find remarkable at the beginning of the process that now sticks out like a sore thumb is that at the very beginning of any time you meet with your cast and director and designers, the costume designer puts all of the pictures of all the renderings of all of every character's outfit. And I noticed that Jim and Casey's characters had completely different outfits. Casey in particular had 2 different suits. And it was pretty quick into the process. We thought, he can't have 2 different suits. He doesn't leave. He barely leaves stage. So I think pretty quickly, y'all, right? You can nod. We learned pretty quickly. It's just going to be about one piece or another piece. It depended on what piece. I think that took some time. I don't really remember like the Bianca Baptista. How soon did you discovered that it was a hat and headband change?
At this point, I don't even, I don't know about you, Casey. I don't remember like the progressive steps in finding the specifics of that. I think right away we were like, we got to have less, we got to do less. But as we started working, there were certain things that made sense of like, well, that's easy to switch back and forth. So that's probably going to serve us better.
We also, when we began to put that together, we began to realize, I remember at the inception of this idea, we were doing things like ducking behind a shrub and coming out with a hat, and ducking behind a shrub again and putting a new hat on. And we realized pretty quickly that it had to be like, hey, audience, so I'll take someone's hat off and we'll hold the hat and we'll talk to the hat as if that's a different character. But it's all happening on stage, which I think is part of the fun for the audience.
Okay, so we got a couple more questions here from our audience. Claire Grunwald asks, why was Petruchio wearing a wedding dress too? What was the inspiration for doing this particular interpretation? So talking a little bit about the concept and the gender politics at the center of the concept for the piece.
Yeah, I can jump in. That was definitely a Shana idea from the beginning, and gone through, supported by Raquel Adorno, our incredible costume designer's work that just brought it to life in an incredible way, and a real gift from the 2 of them for me as to exactly the kind of person I wanted Petruchio to be, which is, I think, even in the most classical production of this play, is I keep calling him a troll, but like in a lovable sense, someone who's able, be a troll for good, someone who's able to point the finger at the people in power, who would be, in this case, the patriarchy. And I think that even in the classical play, I believe that he shows up in it's just a mess. It's all dirty and it's mismatching clothing and it's a boot that doesn't match another, and it's huge faux pas for the wedding. And in ours, I'm glad that we made it be, which I think that he is making a statement to do there, but there it seems to be more about maybe targeted at embarrassing Kate for being next to him in that way, or to also call out the whole ceremony. But in this way, it's able to be more of a statement of the ceremony of a wedding and what it means to the patriarch of yes, we are now celebrating this woman.
Well, you have in that speech, like revel in her maidenhead or whatever, that it's almost like if you can bring a mirror to it, it does feel like, even however Kate takes it in that moment,
right,
it does feel like we're in this together, and it doesn't have to be like you're up on a little pedestal in your little white floofy gown, like we'll both be in our
right.
in this thing that is actually maybe not something either of us, or that I am certainly not, as Kate, even comfortable in. It's not something that I particularly cherish.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to navigate
Mhm.
the world without it, because it's so much of the culture. You
And
know?
I like to play with that idea of that Petruchio in his mind thinks that she will appreciate this huge gesture and sort of, essentially F you to all the people at this wedding. But she doesn't take it that way. And that's a great hitch in their story of what I think are these little moments where he thinks that he's going to win her over with these eccentricities and games that he plays, but she misinterprets, and then by the end maybe they find some common ground, because he is an outsider like she is, and I think that's something that he identifies in her right away in that first wooing scene, and wants to do that. So I think he gets really excited about trying to show her who he is at this wedding, while also showing all the other guests at this wedding, this whole thing is dumb, right? Not this connection that I'm going to have with this person, but this whole celebrating the loss of her maidenhood. It's like, that's gross. That's ridiculous. That's, so I like to think that that's what he's doing by putting that wedding dress on, aside from just looking absolutely incredible.
He loves that wedding dress.
That is
It's
maybe my
his favorite costume.
my
he's
favorite
ever worn.
costume I've ever worn.
The first few
Man.
fittings, I could not get him to stop talking
No.
about it. So
Yeah.
thank
I'm
you.
sure. Well, but in all seriousness, though, it's a really palpable moment, because I feel like he's not just communicating that to her and to the other characters in the play, but sitting out in the house, which is the experience that I got to have through previews and through opening. It is a moment when some assumptions are being sort of mirrored back to the audience. Right when you first make that grand entrance through the center of the house, or through the center of the stage, there's a moment where everyone sort of goes, "What is happening?" And then they settle into it and they think, "Oh yeah, it is ridiculous. This is seeing you in that dress is, I think, a moment when we recognize the performance of this event that they're going through here." So yeah, and actually, now that I think about it, Daniel, you're not the only one who wears a white garment of another gender in this play. So Jim, I feel like we're going to be talking about your portrayal of Bianca for a while after this play closes. What has it been like to jump into this character? Are you drawing from anyone in media or in real life? Who are you basing her on, and what's your experience been so far playing Bianca?
Say me.
Yeah, it's based on Colleen. I met with Shana via Zoom really early, as she was trying to figure out if she could do it with 4 actors or with 5. And one of the big questions was whether she could, in fact, really have one of the men play the younger sister, in order, again, to point up the way we think about gender and our expectations about gender. And her thoughts, right when we first read it, was, she said, if I could just try to plug into the intentions and not worry about having to be a girl. So I've tried not to go overboard in trying to come up with a girlish voice, or I sink into a posture that makes me feel young and coquettish.
Yeah.
And beyond that, it was a great opportunity to play. Usually, I think the younger sister is sort of like a victim in the playing of it a lot, and this was just a great opportunity to play someone who has found a way to play the patriarchy against itself. She's really smart. She's gathered up as much power as the patriarchy will allow, and she wields it with a lot of deftness. And that's a really great way to move my way through the play. And I know it is, can hear the people's, gasp when that white camisole thing comes out at first. But I think once they're past that, the delight, I think, is in the fact of getting to play against the stereotypes. I think so. Where you expect her to be a real innocent, she's flashing people in the audience, and so
Now they're going to be running to the theater in droves.
Oh, that's part of why we wanted to do this. But thank you for that, Jim. I think that she is a bit of a departure from how I've seen her played before, in that she is probably one of the more savvy characters in an ecosystem filled with not very savvy characters. And so, speaking of not very savvy characters, Casey, my personal favorite scene in this is when you come in as the merchant deep into Act 2. And I've noticed, Colleen, because you're a professional and you would never break on stage, that when I'm sitting house right, it is a little bit of a struggle for you when Casey is feeling around for the straw before you take the cocktail from him. And what it's making me realize, Casey, is just how specific you're being with some of these comedic moments as this various cast of characters who are hilarious throughout. Can you talk a little bit about how much work it was, or what the work was like in order to get those comedic beats just right before you got into the house with an audience on opening night? I mean, was that a tedious process? Was it something that you felt out from the beginning and had a great instinct for, or did it just, how did you approach the comedy in this and being those characters who are larger than life?
Yeah, I think it was all of those things. I think it could be, I think something Jim said is really apropos here as well. I mean, it all comes eventually back to the intention, and I find myself being most successful in those scenes when those characters are really just trying to get what they want and what they need. And the obstacle, for instance, of the merchant is being drunk, but trying to just get what you need. But we had such a great team on this. I mean, not only Shana, but we had John Phillips on it, who was a wonderful, incredible comedic mind, is sort of like the exact choreography that really works, and the buttons that the buttons to press and how to press them. And Colleen and I spent many rehearsals on those two scenes just looking at the choreography, talking through the lines, but not so much acting them, but simply blocking them for the choreography of I think there's a lot of math in comedy, which I'm not great at. I'm not good at. And I have a real hard time understanding what things look like from outside. So it takes good eyes from the outside to be like, actually, if you turn left here, and then you follow Colleen, and then you wait until she grabs the cup, and then, so it takes a lot of people, I think, from the outside helping you hone those things to really make them pop and to make them work. But also, I think at the end, I said this to Jim at one point, just looking at the script, you get so bogged down in like the complexity of the play, and then you look back at your script and you go, oh yeah, actually this is a funny play. Like, it's just actually pretty funny. And a lot of that is just Shakespeare, like the situation. The situation for the merchant, for instance, is just absurd. It's just an absurd situation that he sort of presses these two characters together, and one manipulates the other, who is, in so many of the versions of Shrew I've seen, he's incredibly intoxicated. And I think everyone understands that there's an intention here. He's like a bumbling buffoon. So much of it is just from Shakespeare. And then it's just from choreographing with all these wonderful people. Everyone in the cast has such a good sense of working together to sort of help each other with every single beat and keep it clear. So I think it was a big amalgamation of all those things. It could be tedious, to be completely honest. There were times when I found it tedious, but there were also times when it was incredibly rewarding, and we made each other laugh a lot. So that was great.
Well, it all seemed to have come together quite successfully. And thank you for giving that shout out to John Phillips, our assistant director, because he just seems like such an influential voice in the play now that I've seen it a couple of times. And, having been an assistant director here before, it's kind of an odd job in that room because everybody is so skilled and sometimes they don't need your help, but I can tell JP was helping on this one. Claire Grunewald asks, what was the liquid in the merchant's glass? Anybody know? Casey, that wasn't.
It's antifreeze from my Saturn. It's been going every night. It's water.
So you all have been open for a week now, going on a week now. You've had adult audiences or general audiences, and now you've just started to do student matinees. Can anyone speak a little bit about the difference in the two audiences? When I look at this play, there's a part of me that cannot deny the idea that this was a play that was made for the TikTok generation, just because there's so much going on and it's so big and colorful and there's so much switching back and forth. Did the student matinee respond yesterday?
I'll take this one. Generally, younger audiences tend to be quieter. Because I think that first of all, everyone, when they're 16, we're all afraid to laugh or make any sound. But also they haven't quite, a lot of them, understood the talk back, sort of the give and take relationship there is in live theater. However, we did have a lot of giggling, lots of high pitched, uncontrollable giggling, especially from house left. You know who you are. I don't know who you are, but there was a couple of girls who were really enjoying, I think it seemed to me they enjoyed seeing some of the men, in particular Jim, in a female role, gaming the system. But they also really enjoyed watching Kate plant her staff in the ground and say, "This is me." So that was kind of cool. We don't really know yet. We haven't had really enough audiences. I would say with the adult audiences, they've been really different. We've had some really vocally participatory audiences, and we've had some really quiet thinking audiences. I think that there's so much that's weird about this play from the very beginning, although I think it's really accessible and easily understood. I think that visually, it's really a lot to take in. And I think also the questions, I don't really feel like we're asking inappropriately challenging questions about gender. I think that is what is happening in our society at large right now. But I do think what we're raising, including the wedding dress, I think these are really thoughtful places to sit in. So I think that a lot of people are just sitting and really taking that in, asking themselves, why does this make me uncomfortable? Or why does it really, delight me? But we've had some good audible pleasure at some of the comedy as well. So that's really great. We need some yucks out there, everybody.
Okay, so we've really just got about 2 minutes left here. So I just want to ask the question that we all wrestle with here. Anytime we choose to do a play, and you kind of segued into it nicely, Colleen, I'm just curious, who has any thoughts about why this play is important to be doing now or relevant for a contemporary audience? Is there a reason that you all discussed in the rehearsal room, like here is why we're doing this play now?
Yeah, sorry. It's just piggybacking on a lot of what Colleen was saying, that gender at large, and here is I think that it was Shakespeare's intention for this to be somewhat of a satire. There is that literal auction scene. Us setting it as an auction is just calling it what it is. It's two men outbidding each other to have permission to
For a human being.
I mean, that is an exaggerated version of something that we see, and sometimes literal version of things that we see today, of the lack of equality between the genders, and also inability to understand of the people that live in between. That can,
or that gender in and of itself can create such icky cages, for us to all live in, and feel like we have to abide by certain rules and things, and
right.
and so to see because I don't think we have our story, but I think like that whole community, I think we're seeing how all of them are wrestling with that, and either wanting to live in it further or break out of it or find new rules for themselves. I think that's a really exciting story to tell right now.
Yeah, I agree. Colleen.
I just want to say too, that, you know, certainly there's the question of gender, which I absolutely believe Shakespeare, I agree with you, Danielle. I think that he wrote a play about patriarchy and pretty much all the men are idiots in the play. I mean, that's what it is on the page. So that's got to tell you something. Not that we think men are idiots, but I think that the point was that it's not necessarily the people in control who are the smartest, nor do they have everyone's best interest in mind. But I also really think that this play is about two people finding each other, a baseline love story. But it's also, at least in our production, and I love it so much, I really literally, I can't not help, I cry every night. When I'm on stage, I'm going to cry right now. But it's about anger and self-loathing. And we all know what that is. And what self-loathing does, it's a prison, and it keeps you from love. It keeps you from connection. Self-loathing at its base is dishonest. It's a dishonest prison that we built for ourselves. And I think that it's what's beautiful about this particular play, this particular production. I think we generally think of men as full of rage. And I think we have a woman who's full of rage, who is given a really challenging gift in this other human being to see what rage looks like. And I think it's a gorgeous rendition of how to crack whatever that is open so that you can join your heart with someone else and thereby join your heart with the world.
Thank you, Colleen. That's a really great note to end on. I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you to all of you for joining us, our whole cast for the Taming of the Shrew. Thank you to the audience for joining us for our talk back. Please look out for more of these coming in the future. And if you haven't seen Taming of the Shrew, it's currently running in the Touchstone Theater now through November 14th. Thank you again for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Take care.